Welcome to another week when we explore those things about life and faith that I learned from the Indian community. You know, I was 58 years old when I was assigned as Bishop of the Oklahoma area of the United Methodist Church. And I knew things would be different working with the Indian community. But looking back, I really didn't anticipate that I was as dumb as I was at 58 years old, being ripe for so much learning. But that was my experience, and I shared with you. Such was the case at the first worship service we attended in Oklahoma that was planned by the Indians. It was different. We finally all gathered in the place of worship, and then a person would be called by name with his tribe, and that person would sing a tribal hymn, his tribal hymn. A few knew the words of that tribal hymn that would sing along with this person. The rest of us would hum. Another person would be identified, and that followed and another person, and there were several tribes there, and so it had to be 45 minutes and maybe even an hour that tribal hymns were sung. I then all of a sudden realized what this was all about, that as different tribes gathered together for worship, their call to worship was that every tribe would sing their own song. And as they sang their own song, indeed, there was a sense of belonging to that community gathered for worship. You see, the common liturgy of a call to worship was not enough. A statement of welcome was not sufficient. The handshake at the door was somehow lacking. What was needed was a radical experience of participation and inclusion. After all the tribal hymns had been sung, all were included, and the worshiping community had become one. Happened every time in worship for 8 years. What I learned over and over again was that rituals of welcome, like a handshake or a hug, can only be sometimes skin deep. Acts of welcome were the front porch. To belong was inside each other's life, sitting, if you will, in the household image at the table eating together rather than having a conversation on the front porch of welcome. Having a sense of belonging, no longer strangers, but belonging to each other. Grace Church experienced this 3 or 4 years ago one Sunday morning when a member of an Indian tribe who was employed at Southwestern College came to worship with his family, and they were welcomed, they were greeted. The handshakes took place, and during the time of announcements, the person was introduced, and he sort of quickly took the floor and said how meaningful it was for he and his family to be here at Grace. Those of you who were there that morning remember what happened? All of a sudden, the family started singing, and they sang their tribal hymn. Most of the congregation had no idea what was going on. They appreciated the music. They thought maybe it was a special planned music for the morning. No, 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 no. But to be a part of belonging to Grace, the worshiping community that morning, they sang their tribal hymn. They wanted to belong. They didn't want to be guests. They didn't want to be strangers, but they wanted to belong to the worshiping community. What I learned from the Indian community was that often welcoming is a nice social gesture, but it doesn't include belonging to each other. The call to worship with the singing of the hymns of every tribe present for the establishment of the community of faith, not composed of members and guests, members and visitors, but all present in community, members one of another. You see, because of this experience with the Indian community and worship, the words of the Apostle Paul written to the new communities of faith, the first generation followers of Jesus, has had new meaning for me. For Paul continually said, we are members one with each other. These are the words of Paul. In a world of Greeks and Romans and Hebrews and Parthians and many other tribes and many other clans. But Paul said, as followers of Jesus, he said, yes to the tribes, yes to the clans, but more than that, your identity, common identity in Christ is where you belong to each other. One's identity is more than who you are, for in Christ you are spiritually one with each other, members with each other, belonging to each other. Now, I'm certainly not abandoning the importance of words and acts, and no one loves a hug more than I do. But for me, welcoming in the community of faith must be a prelude to inclusion, a prelude to belonging. You see, worship is wonderful. Welcome is wonderful. But inclusion and belonging is what the faith community experience with each other, regardless of our identity in a tribe, a clan, or a nation. We've all heard it said, some of my best friends are blank. You can fill in the blank. But when that relationship is clarified is when the question is asked, how often have you eaten at blank's table? How often has blank been invited to your table? Eating with each other is different and more than a front porch conversation of welcome. Yes, I learned from the Indian community of faith that as persons of faith, we are called to be more than just welcoming communities where there are guests and visitors always welcome. We are called to be inclusive. We are called to belong to each other. When welcome is the first step to inclusion, we experience being members one with the other. When welcome is the only step, not the first step, but the only step, we are in the Apostle Paul's words so often. A noisy gong and a clanging cymbal. This belonging to each other is the foundation of the experience of Holy Communion in the United Methodist Church. We have an open table for communion. No innies and outies. No one is excluded because of race, sexual orientation, class, beliefs, or any other human distinction. When we celebrate the sacrament, it is an act of belonging to each other. May it be so in every community of faith where there are no visitors, where there are no guests, but rather a community of belonging to each other. That's what I learned. Thank you for taking the time of allowing me to share. For your thought and your conversation, I would offer, what are your experiences of welcoming being the only step in the life of the church? Secondly, what are your experiences of welcoming being the first step leading to belonging and inclusion in the life of the church? And finally, what are your experiences of being a visitor or a guest rather than being included and having a sense of belonging in the life of the church? A lot to think about. A lot of memories to recall. Thank you for this time together.